even with that thought, I didn't give up. And I just kept trying, kept failing at different things.
People today have this new phenomenon, which is sort of like a collective self-loathing.
Museum of the Dungeon of the Inquisition. So I saw the most horrendous torture devices that I could ever even imagine. They're burned into my memory. The brain is really more of a cognitive filtering device. So it's filtering out all the information that it's capable of perceiving to give you the most important, relevant, actionable information.
Aubrey Marcus. Wow. So great to see you, my friend. I see you're not in your usual haunt. I can tell by the neon lights in the background you're in somewhere else that looks more tropical. Aubrey, such a pleasure to have you here with me today. And we've had a couple of super epic conversations doing podcasts together. But then also I went to Arcadia with you and I was just blown away at what an amazing event that was and how so many people were there and so engaged. And I was blown away how it was all free too. That was like really mind-boggling for me. So I really wanted to interview you on my podcast. And, you know, you obviously are so well known by so many people around the world because of all of your work in spirituality. And also all the podcasts you've done, which I think are now up to somewhere around 400, right?
Mm-hmm.
Close to 400 now. So that's really amazing. So such a pleasure to have you here. Welcome.
Yeah, great to be here, brother. Yeah, we've had some good times and some great conversations, both recorded conversations and unrecorded conversations. I think if we could get access to the unrecorded files, I think that might be our most popular episode yet.
It probably would be, because we definitely go pretty damn deep. And so I'd love to first of all hear about, you know, your life story. How did you become the Aubrey Marcus sensation podcast extraordinaire, as well as entrepreneur and just overall good human being? How did you come to this stage of your life?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good place to start is just the beginning, and I'll try to keep it as just to the most relevant facts. But I think to understand me, you have to understand the influences that kind of molded me early. So my father and mother, they were only together for a short time. My mother was a Wimbledon semifinalist, professional tennis player. My father, so strong athletic background on my mother's side. My father was one of the
What year? Can I ask what years that was? Because I was a big Wimbledon follower, so for a long time.
So I believe it was 1968. She lost to Billie Jean King in the Wimbledon semis. And then the following year in 69, she had like a number 6 ranking in the world because of her Wimbledon finish. And she also had some good doubles finishes, finals of the French. She never won a major though. So, you know, that's one thing that, you know, it's interesting is I've been on this psychedelic medicine journey for 23 years, and we'll talk about that because that's one of the most important defining factors in my life. But, you know, recently, you know, I've been with my mother through some of these journeys. She's gone and done ayahuasca with me and some of my other ceremonies and breathworks. And it's funny that even now, you know, 45 years, 55 years away from like when she was even playing, she'll still go back and play matches in her mind, even in the deepest recesses of her psyche. She's like, if only I was like, Mom, that was 55 years ago, you know, but the fierce competitive spirit that she has and just, is something that was really there. And my father in his own way, he dabbled in a lot of different sports, but really he put that into his commodities futures trading. So he's chapter 1 of Jack Schwager's famous book, Market Wizards. He'd mentored people like Paul Tudor Jones and Bruce Kovner and some of the big hedge fund legends in the world. So my parents, truly excellent in their fields. And then my step parents, also truly excellent in their fields. My stepdad was a SWAT team squad leader and worked out in Compton and Pomona. And so like one of the baddest, toughest, most masculine human beings. I mean, he was like a superhero when I was growing up, you know, and telling stories about chasing down bad guys. And he could literally say anything. He could play out a scene from a Hulk movie or a Thor movie, and I would believe him because he's just that big. He's a hulking man. So I had like the epitome of masculinity. and represented in my stepdad. And then my stepmother was a holistic medicine doctor that worked with all of Pat Riley's teams. So LA Lakers in the 80s, New York Knicks in the 90s, the Heat in the 2000s. So really top of her game. So all this to say, I was surrounded by excellence. So my expectation for myself was excellence. I recognized really early that you can use the word like privileged, and I don't like that word because of the way that it's been weaponized. However, if you want to talk about fucking privileged, what a privilege to have 4 unbelievable guides in my life who had reached excellence, who'd been able to confront that force of resistance within them and overcome it and be incredibly successful. So my expectations for myself, that was always a double-edged sword. I always knew that I was meant for something really important. And I still feel that. And I still feel when I look back at everything I've accomplished in my life, I still feel like, man, one of these days, Aubrey, you're going to break through and you're going to figure it out. Like my expectations for myself are so high that no matter what I've achieved, and that's something, again, that's part of my own personal growth process. So, but double clicking back on my life, I'll try to keep it quick. Expectation of excellence, incredible guides. We weren't religious as a family. We moved to Texas when I was 15 or 14, moved to Austin. So I've been in Austin for now, I don't know, 27 years. And I encountered religion for the first time because I grew up in Southern California, and everybody around me I didn't have any practicing Christians.
So you're 41 now then?
41. Yep. About to be 42. So I moved to Texas and I encountered Christianity for the first time in a big way. And I was like, wow, this is bullshit. Like I do not, like I don't agree with any of it.
Bible Belt, isn't that's part of the Bible Belt?
I mean, yeah, it's the tail end. I wouldn't say it's like the peak.
Tail end of the Bible, yeah. I think it ends in Austin, probably.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's the final node in the journey. So I actually became, and then with that, when I was 15, we took a trip to Italy. And one of the museums we stopped at was a museum of the Dungeon of the Inquisition. So I saw the most horrendous torture devices that I could ever even imagine. They're burned into my memory. And I'd have to say 75% of them involve the genitals. And I was like, this is fucked up. This is fucked up. So I started reading Christopher Hitchens. I started reading, God is Not Great. I started reading Bertrand Russell, Why I Am Not a Christian. Started reading Spong. Started reading all these things. I was like, I am going to be the atheist champion of the world, and I'm going to fucking take out this nonsense. Okay, so angry atheist. I know, right? I know. So angry atheist. Then my father he got turned on in the psychedelic medicine path because he was wrestling with his own demons, and he was working with some of Stan Groff's crew, Stan Groff being a legend in the space. So he set up an opportunity for me to go on a Vision Quest initiation with one of the shamans that he worked with out in the mountains of New Mexico and do psychedelic medicine. And I was fucking terrified. I mean, I got stoned with my brothers and my homie John, and we would mostly just figure out what kind of fucking snack we were going to eat and like what hilarity we were going to find ourselves in. But so I was, in some ways, at least I was familiar with cannabis as a mind altering substance. Of course, alcohol. I partied when I was in, but nothing like that had the kind of intensity and seriousness of a psychedelic medicine journey, right? Never even experimented with anything. So I'm terrified. I grab a rock that I was going to hold on to, and it was my special rock. And as long as I held on to this rock, I would know that I still existed. And it's so full of fear, but she was amazing. I had a concoction of MDMA and psilocybin, and I felt my body evaporate. I literally felt my body evaporate, and the only thing remaining, the only word that I could use for it was soul. And I was like, oh shit, my plan to become the world's greatest atheist just went out the fucking window, because here I am, and all I can know myself as is a soul that has a body. And I went through this full life review process, very much like someone does in a near-death experience. And I was like, man, life review is like heaven and hell. All of the things that you're proud of, the love that you shared, that puts you in a state of bliss in heaven as you review your life. All of the things that you're ashamed of, all of the people that you've hurt, that's your hell. It's having to actually feel full compassion, full sympathy with all of that. And so there was this big reconciliation with, all right, I still don't think capital R religion has got most of their shit together. You know, there's a lot of problems, but there's something there. There was some kernel of truth.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really the most pivotal moment for me, where I could never turn back. Once I uncovered that piece and I realized that there was direct access to information that was completely obscure from any other way, any other source, like you had to feel its truth. Like somebody could talk to me about the soul and I'm telling them to go fuck off. Like, fuck off. Prove it. Where is it? And then I do these medicines and I'm like, oh my God, here it is. And I can't argue with it anymore. So that became one of my ways to access knowledge. And I've continued that path for, 23 years now, where I've gone through all of the major great medicines and worked with the great indigenous healers and even started to pioneer my own methods of accessing these states of consciousness. So that's a very important thread through my life that has really helped guide my own
I'm
philosophical
surprised to hear
understanding.
that you were first introduced to it by your father, basically going and dealing with some of, as you said, his own demons, right? So that's fascinating. I don't know that there's that many people that I know that have been kind of introduced to it by their father, and I'm sure your father, especially all of the four people that you mentioned, they all must have been very large role models for you.
Totally.
What did you think about it the first time you heard about, sort of like psilocybin and MDMA and the stuff that he was probably doing, maybe ayahuasca as well?
Yeah, he was doing ayahuasca as well. We had a very strong intellectual bond, and we would talk about everything, and he was very good at explaining it, but you can't ultimately explain it. It's fundamentally ineffable. So I would listen intently with great curiosity, but I didn't get it. I didn't get it at all. I think you think of visions like you would think of a hallucination. And I think a lot of people use the word hallucinogen. I've never taken a hallucinogen. Everything I've seen has been either didactic, it's been instructive, or it's been more real than the reality that I normally see, right? So it's not a hallucination, but I imagined it like a hologram that I would see. Like, oh, I'm going to see a hologram. I'm going to have a hologram in front of me. Of course, it's not like that. And the feelings that are actually you're feeling, they're just really indescribable. So I listened intently, but I just had no idea.
Yeah, it's funny. I always felt like the first time I had, tried psilocybin, immediately afterward, I felt like that didn't give me hallucinations at all. What it did is it revealed the illusion. It revealed what the fabric is, the reality behind everything that we think is real. Mm-hmm. And even after having done it, I have to say, it's like I can still see the things as if I'm on psilocybin right now, for example. Mm-hmm. I can still see the structures of within walls and everything, like flower of life patterns and grid lines and everything. So that's been a legacy that's been left with me since the very first time I did it. Mm-hmm. And it just sort of turned something on in me. It was not an illusion. It was not illusory. It was actually the opposite. It sort of reveals and pulls down the veil. Do you feel like that too?
Yeah. I mean, one of the ways that my teacher, Don Howard, described it is a clarigen. It actually brings clarity.
Clarigen, right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So rather than a hallucinogen, it's a clarigen. You're seeing beyond Maya, beyond the illusion to a greater, at least deeper truth of the reality from just a higher perspective where more of you is online. I mean, Aldous Huxley talks about it in his book, Doors of Perception, where the brain is really more of a cognitive filtering device. So it's filtering out all the information that it's capable of perceiving to give you the most important, relevant, actionable information. Okay, this thing is solid. This is a tree. This is a flower. This is a person. They may be dangerous. You may want to fuck them. You got to watch out. This is food. Maybe you want to eat it. Maybe it's poison. You're just filtering like the most basic information. And what the psychedelics do is they open the Phoenician blinds a little bit of the filtering device, and then you start to actually see reality. And I really like that description that he put in that book. And Huxley's work really was a defining factor for me. His book Island, where he first, he posited and created that utopian civilization in Pala, and then the clash against the dystopian empire. And I think very much we see this happening now in our own way, where people
Mm-hmm.
are dreaming into a more beautiful world our hearts know is possible, like our friend Charles wrote about,
Mm-hmm.
and then seeing empire coming to take more power, more control. And then we see psychedelics as ultimately, I see them as a liberator. I see them as a key component of the revolution, but also to not make the mistakes of the last revolution in the 1960s, which
Yeah.
was an against revolution. And we're now in a time where we cannot, like, again, the against us versus them concept is actually a part of the nature of empire itself. And so to overthrow empire, you cannot use the same mechanisms, the same tools. You can't use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. So you can't use empire's tools to dismantle empire's control. You have to use different tools, and it's going to be actually including the people from the inside, all of the corporations, all of the things we have to infiltrate and get them to defect,
Mm-hmm.
from politics to corporate. So that's really, as I look out at this world, and of course there's other threads from my life I'm happy to bring up, but as I look out in this world, I see part of my role is infiltrating just people, not looking at, all right, you're an executive at Pfizer. No, you're Larry or you're Susan. And sure, you have your position, but you're not the enemy. You're a person. And the way I see it is there's tons of movies where there's some evil force and it kind of takes over an individual, and that individual does horrible things. And then there's a hero that kills the evil force that's kind of controlling people, body snatchers-esque, like mind control. And then even if your friend was over there eating another one of your friends, like a zombie, but you killed the head zombie, and you're like, at that moment, they're like, oh my God, what did I do? And it's like, it's all right. It's not your fault. You were under the influence. I think that's actually a metaphor for what's going on now. It's like everybody, like that forgiveness, that level of instant forgiveness, like when somebody comes to their own recognition, like that's, I think, the invitation to get people to actually change the way that they're operating in the world. Is like, listen, I understand you were under a delusion, and when
Mm-hmm.
you break that delusion, like, here we are, we have a seat at the table. And that's really what I see myself doing, both with like the content that I put out, the message that I put out, my own personal interactions and ceremony work that I do. And that really seems to me like that's the way, and that's what I'm really focused on.
So let's rewind for a bit. So how old were you when your father first told you about his medicine journey?
I must have been no older than 12.
Wow. So that was really early in
Mm,
your sort of, especially that's a very formative time, 12 years old.
yeah.
So how did it change your father?
The medicine actually gave him some access and some agency over, the difficulties he had with his own mind. And my father worked with psychedelic medicine from when I was 12 to when I was about 26. And though during that period, I saw him become happier. I saw him become more like less neurotic, less prone to fits of rage. I mean, there were some challenging moments because he had so much rage in his system that he could snap into a state of rage, and he wouldn't get physically violent, but certainly like emotionally violent, in those times. And that all kind of slowed, that all kind of came to a halt. So it was steady progress. And sadly, when I was 26, he stopped the medicine path and he went on a different path. And it was a path of trying to channel. Now, channeling is, of course, when you're inviting other spirits to enter your body and speak to you in some way. And my dad didn't have any aptitude to channel, but he was very diligent. And I watched over the next 4 years as he kind of left the medicine path and went to this other path of trying to like channel the wisdom of angels. And he was, what was actually happening, I think was that fundamentally he was losing his edge as a commodities trader because the proliferation of computers and like access to the right information and data, it just kind of outpaced his own ability to kind of navigate as a maverick in the space. Everything just got better, and he was looking for another edge. And I think he thought the edge might come if he could tap into other extra normal forces, which he did experience in the plant medicines. But plant medicines are never going to tell you whether to buy Bitcoin or whether to sell it. Like it doesn't, it's not the way it works. It doesn't, it's not how it operates. So I think he was looking for an edge. And so he left the plant medicine path and went to that other path. And it ultimately really deeply corrupted his mind. And so, unfortunately, my father's kind of isolated himself from all communication, and we haven't been able to speak since I was, probably 31. I reach out to him every now and again, but it's interesting to see that, that was another one of the lessons of, okay, here's some of the pitfalls of just wantonly opening yourself to all spiritual ideas and beliefs. Is there's some that are really, really helpful, and there's some that can be ultimately very corruptive.
So when you were growing up, you said you've always had kind of very high expectations for your life. I can imagine that being, I guess I'm quite similar in that regard. So, but sometimes when you have such high expectations of yourself, it's also very difficult to love and accept yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So what challenges did you face as a younger man in kind of, your journey of learning love and acceptance? Because I think that's a big part of what I know you are now.
Yeah.
And love and acceptance can be perceived to be somewhat antithetical to very high expectations in a competitive and 3D world, right? So how have you dealt with that? And actually, I don't think, I mean, I don't mean to lead the witness here, but I don't believe that they have to be juxtaposed against each other. But I think society sees them in large part as juxtaposed.
Mm-hmm. Yes, for sure. So I'll tell a little bit of the story, and then I'll get back onto that idea. There was not a lot of love and acceptance for myself up until, well, probably it took me into my mid 30s, and I'll tell about like a key moment for that, when I actually realized how little I really genuinely love myself. So until I was 30, I had a marketing company. I was doing this and that. I was doing investor relations. I was doing fine. I had enough, I was making enough money from enough different sources that I had a nice little house, and I had a fiance at the time, and we had a lot of fun. We partied a lot, but I was deeply unsatisfied. I knew that Alexander the Great had conquered the known world by the age of 25. And there I was, 28, 29, and what the fuck had I done with my life? And I was sure that I went left when I was supposed to go right, and somehow I'd fucked it up, and it was way too late. And I was just going to be like, in my own mind, an absolute failure for the rest of my life. But even with that thought, I didn't give up. And I just kept trying, kept failing at different things. I started a men's nail polish company, which ironically is actually Machine Gun Kelly started one, and I think it's doing quite well, but I was a little early on that. So I started like all kinds of things that didn't work, but I also started Onnit, and I started Onnit with,
so wait, did you actually wear the men's nail polish?
Oh yeah. I was rocking men's nail polish, mostly on my toes, but I was rocking that for a while. Yeah, I had toenail polish. Well, what started is I saw Chuck Liddell, who is a big UFC fighter, and he painted his toes, and he was like the baddest man on the planet at the time. It was like, if fucking Chuck Liddell does it, this is going to take off. And a man doesn't want to use women's nail polish. A man wants to use man's nail polish.
Oh my gosh, that's epic. Okay, keep
Yeah.
going.
So that business failed. But I also had an idea to start Onnit. And the idea with Onnit was my stepmother, as a holistic medicine doctor who was working with athletes, before every game, I had a stack of supplements. Before every test, I had a stack of supplements. They were different. And I knew that they worked. But when you go to a GNC or you go to a store, nothing ever worked like the stacks of supplements that my stepmom gave me. Yeah, there's pre-workouts that'll make your fucking veins bulge in your head, but there wasn't actually effective targeted supplementation like I would receive, and like the real top level.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like instead of having to take 8 different supplements for taking a test for your brain, I was like, there's got to be a way to put this all in one supplement. And I'd become friends with Joe Rogan at the time, and we were finishing my second podcast with him back in the early days, back in the Red Band days. We're talking like podcast 65 of his, like way early. I was leaving the house, we were playing pool, and I was like, hey man, like what supplement would you like the most? He was like, I'd like a cognitive enhancer. I was like, fucking great. Like, I'm going to make the best one there ever was. And so I went to the lab, I figured it out. I worked, talked to my stepmom. I went through all the PubMed and just created what I thought would be the best supplement for the brain. And ultimately, that was what birthed Alpha Brain, which was on its flagship, and which would be on its flagship. And it also solidified a partnership between Joe and I, where we were like, I was like, hey man, like, you want to be a part of this? And then we negotiated what his equity was, basically gave up, a good portion of the company to Joe, and just said, all right, we're in this together. And Alpha Brain was too strong, but it really worked. And we were fucking so excited because of how well it worked. We're like, holy shit, this works. But it was
What does it mean to be too strong?
So it was working with the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. Yep. And you can have a cholinergic response that feels like you just had too much tobacco. So for anybody who's like, when you're a kid, you like put that dip in and then you get nauseous for a little while if you had too much tobacco, or you spend a little too long on that cigar without paying attention,
A little lightheaded.
It's that kind of lightheaded, dizzy, nauseous. A cholinergic response is very similar to a nicotinic response. And so we had, I mean, I really wanted it I wanted people to feel it. So I went a little hard in the paint. We backed it off into a place where it was like, all right, this is the sweet spot. Launched the company, and it was a fucking rocket ship. I mean, we went from hardly any sales to, 8-figure trajectory virtually overnight. And that was in 2011. And, we had the right combination of a great formula, and Joe marketing it. And then I just figured out all the logistics to make sure that we could get supply. And what was interesting about the company is I raised $110,000 to start the company, but I basically blew through most of that. So I got 60 of that from my friend Bodie Miller, who's the skier, and I got 50 of that from a family friend that I did some investment banking work for. So I started on it with 110 grand, but that doesn't even tell the full story, because I basically blew through all of the 110 grand marketing some hangover supplements that also were good, but nobody cared. They're way too expensive. And so I was down to $0 basically. But when I launched Alpha Brain, we were broke. But my manufacturer, shout out to Dale at Columbia Nutritional, my manufacturer gave me net 30 terms. So we got the Alpha Brain in. We sold the Alpha Brain and so it was like $100,000 of Alpha Brain. We sold that overnight. And then I had another order on backup. We got that in like a week. That was double the amount we sold. So that was $200,000. We sold that overnight. And then it was just like, I was like a drug dealer. So by the time I actually had to pay anybody for anything, then we'd already made like over $1 million. So it was easy.
So he basically, Dale's his name. He funded your working capital through your operating
net 30 terms. Yeah, net 30 terms. And that's how we did it. And
well, that's rare because most people can't get that level of sales to cover their expense line, right? In the first month. I mean, that's what you must have humped it like mad to get that level of sales.
Yeah. I mean, it was the perfect storm. And I think like, you know, a lot of people, because my family was wealthy, you know, everybody's like, oh, it must have been easy starting that. My family didn't give me a fucking penny. They were like, this is gonna fail like everything else you did. Basically, like nobody really had any faith that this was gonna work. So they declined. And also, like, I was like, you know what?
So
Like, I
wait,
got to do this on my own
that's
anyway.
really crazy because in preparing for this podcast, I looked up stuff on the internet just to see what I could find. And I saw some of that kind of, stuff where people were like, oh, his company was successful because of his parents. And it's so amazing to hear that it had nothing to do with your parents.
No, zero. And that's also like people always want to try and tear down a success. And this is again why I have the problem with privilege, right? Like, yes, was I privileged? Absolutely. Like I had four incredible parents. You know, I didn't have to pay for my college. Not that my college helped me that much in my career, but it was amazing. You know, I got to study classical civilization and philosophy. I actually have my philosophy professor from college that I loved on my podcast coming out soon.
Really?
Fucking incredible. Yeah. And I did drama and I did all things. I mean, I had amazing opportunities, but when it came to actually starting my business, you know, I'm grateful actually that they were just like, you got to figure this out, man. You got to figure this out. And I mean, I would have liked a little bit more like a faith from them, maybe like, I think this might work. They were like, no, this won't fucking work. Like, I'm not going to give you anything for this. But yeah, that's the real truth of it. And from there, it was really, so at a certain point, a couple years later, I start to recognize like, wow, I have a really successful business here, but I was fucking terrified that I was going to blow it somehow. I was going to miss something, miss somehow, some way, something was going to get fucked up. So I didn't really start to actually feel like, oh my God, like I'm actually doing something. And at the same time, my own podcast started to get some downloads and I started to get a platform, and it was like everything that I'd always dreamed started to happen. And that was a double-edged sword because that gave me enough reason to start to love myself. But then my reason for loving myself was still contingent upon an external reality.
Conditional. Mm-hmm.
It was still conditional. But I'd reached sufficient conditions that some form of conditional self-love was at least possible. Because before, I didn't even have conditional self-love. I mean, maybe right after a basketball game, if I crushed it, I'd have a little conditional self-love or like, but like, that was difficult. And then so it just kept being a shifting goal line. Like I needed more external validation. And I found that also not only through business, but through my polyamory journey. So I was with my partner, Whitney Miller, and we decided to be polyamorous somewhere around 2012. And that led us on this 8-year polyamory journey. And then so part of my validation was Whitney being, she was my queen and she was fucking awesome. And I like that was part of the validation, a big part of the validation. And then I had other lovers who were also part of the validation. And then as, I didn't have a blueprint for polyamory. I didn't know how this shit worked. I was just trying to figure it out, we were doing our best, just being as honest as we could. And at certain points, everything would go to shit and everybody would hate me and I would lose everybody, because like they would all be mad at each other and then like it would be my fault. And then it's a very difficult situation. And so like in those points when I would lose all my lovers, I would realize like I had zero. That was a way that I validated myself, was that they loved me. And when I would lose them, I would go into deep, deep states of dejection where like almost not like actually suicidal, but as close as you can come without any suicidal ideation. Like my self-love dropped to such a low state. And that was what actually made me aware of like, all right, I cannot base my own love on who loves me, on what I've accomplished. Because I've already, and then everybody would come back and it's still not like I really love myself. I was just at like baseline. So fundamentally, all of these lessons about like pulling in all of the conditions for self-love, it's an ongoing process, but through that whole journey, that's really been key. And then ultimately, now to bring us up to speed, in 2021. 2020, I stepped down as CEO of the company and hired somebody who's amazing, a man named Jason Havey. And if people want to hear the story about the lessons we learned as an entrepreneur, I have a great podcast with Jason Havey on business. And then so he ran it before the pandemic. He became CEO, and then he ran it and led us into an acquisition in 2021, and a huge acquisition that we sold the company to Unilever, and then just now, recently we reached the final level of the earnout. So I'm completely out of Onnit and super proud of everything we've accomplished, and actually super excited about where it's going to go. I think everybody thinks like, oh, when the big guys take it, they're going to ruin it. They're too smart to ruin it. Everybody communicates. If they started fucking with the formulas, everybody would know. If they started cutting corners, everybody would know. And they've done a great job like shepherding it and just trying to expand it into the globally disruptive brand that I think it was destined to be. And interestingly, I went and reacquired the Onnit gym from them this year. So now I'm back as the owner of the Onnit gym, which is cool because that's still one of my favorite places to go on the planet, is to go work out at the Onnit gym, a gym that we created with all of our fitness stuff. So
is that the place you were at with Aaron Rodgers?
That's the place. Yeah.
Nice. So what a story. I mean, how did it make you feel when you decided to sell the company?
I felt like I had taken it to the level that I was capable of taking it, and somebody else needed to come in and really allow it to live its destiny. Like I basically innovated most of the products that I felt like the market really needed. And I was kind of I was running out of my own ideas about what to do with it. And then so just kind of grinding for incremental growth and, doubling down on existing product lines and form factors of our hero products and all of that. It was not exciting to me anymore. So a lot of people posited that there would be a big kind of ego hit for me selling the company, but really, I of course have my own challenges with my ego, but it was never really wrapped up in being CEO. That was never the way I saw myself. I always saw myself as like, how much am I changing the world? How much am I actually making a difference? And that was always from young. And of course, having Onnit support the physical body, which is incredibly important, was like the initial step. If you're looking at like Maslow's pyramid of self-actualization,
Sure.
you got to look at the physical body first. And of course, there's steps below that: food, safety, shelter. I get all that. But for the company to really focus on physical optimization, and then the rest of my trajectory now is, mental and spiritual optimization.
So when did you figure out this whole notion of all these aspects of your life that were really just, in a way, your own way of creating validation, right? Whether it was success in business or having multiple lovers that all loved you, which then was sort of proof positive to you at that time that you're worth loving.
Yeah.
So when was it that you had that big aha? And I guess there was probably some sort of a crash at some point or something that probably helped facilitate that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was recognizing, there was multiple points where everything would get, one aspect of my life would get, removed. So a friend that I thought I could really count on would abandon me. The business, we reached a point where we called it internally cash apocalypse at Onnit, and this was around 2018. And basically what happened was we were going to get a minority investment from an investment banking firm, and we were literally at the 1 yard line. So we distributed all of our working capital to the owners because they weren't acquiring, they were putting in a bunch of capital. They're putting in like $25 million, 1 day away from it. So we distributed everything. And then some stuff went down and we had to pull out of the deal. So we had no cash and we had, a bunch of payables, and so I gave a little bit of money. We pieced in a few things. We sold little chunks of our yoga business. We fucking made it through. And actually, what was interesting, we had a CFO at the time, and the CFO, the CFO walks in and goes, "Well, it looks like we got about 6 weeks till we're bankrupt and insolvent. And so I wish you guys luck, but I'm out of here." And we're like, "You're out of here? What do you fucking mean you're out of here?" And he just literally walked out of the door at that point. And that was a big mistake because he would have had a lot of equity that would have vested, and he would have been a very wealthy man if he didn't do that. But he did, but we pulled it together. Jason Havey, who eventually became the CEO, just worked 16, 18 hours a day and built, leveraged the relationships we had with all our suppliers and told everybody we were going to pay them late. And we basically started from the beginning. But like that experience, my partner Whitney falling in love with another man, and me feeling like now instead of being the king, I was the I don't know, her second preference. I was the jester or whatever. Like, and then points where everybody in my relationships would, be like, "We're done with Aubrey," or I'd be like, "We're done with them." And so whether it was a male friend, whether it was female friends, whether it was business, and there was a huge convergence of all three of those, where one of my closest male friends abandoned me and was just like, "I'm out." One of my, Whitney truly fell in love with another man. I got in a huge car accident, so it disfigured my face pretty significantly. And the business was having cash apocalypse. So like at that point, it was like, wow, like this is absolutely everything. This is rock bottom moment here. Like literally every category has been crushed. And I had a few key kind of angels that really helped me in that process. But also there was Kamal Ravikant wrote a book, Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It. It was all about self-love. And I started to recognize that self-love was a practice. And like Don Miguel Ruiz says in Mastery of Love, practice makes the master. And so to not think that, this was something that I would just naturally have, but to actually understand and apply those lessons of deeply loving myself. And, but it took kind of that rock bottom moment, I think, for me to really start to take that really seriously. And I'm super grateful for that, because without it, I think I would still be barely hanging on by using conditional love. But when everything got stripped away, then at that point, I really had to double down on my own self practices.
Our story is quite similar. I had a similar circumstance in 2016 where I went through a cash apocalypse. It's funny because it has to include scarcity, love. It had to include all of it. Your friends betraying you and abandoning you. And what I realized through the whole thing, it turned out to be the best experience of my entire life.
Mm.
And I can say that today in retrospect, but it was very, very painful, very difficult. And it took me a few years to really realize what had happened, because even though I made it out, and like you, I found a way to cobble together success. I had a battle with the VC. They tried to get control of a company that I had founded that became a unicorn in less than 2 years. And even though I had all the voting share, I had all the super voting rights and everything, it didn't matter because, they had ratchet protections. And if they could just, freeze us out from being able to get any more money, then they could force a down round and be able to capture a lot more of the equity of the company in a tough market scenario. Mm-hmm. And I had a lot of friends who, like your CFO guy, basically did the same thing. It's like, "Oh, I see that you're not likely to win this battle against the VCs, so I'm going to bail on you now." Right? Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I'm grateful for that, because I now realize that the reason why I chose that situation, and I really do mean I believe this wholeheartedly, that every experience that I've had, and I believe every experience you've had as well, we don't consciously choose it, but we in our higher selves are choosing it all, I believe. And so I had to ask myself, it's a massive shift when you go from why did the world do this to me? Why did the world crap on me? To why did I choose this?
Mm-hmm.
And when I finally had that realization of why I chose it, I realized that I believed that I came here to this existence to learn unconditional love. And I had a life completely tied to conditionality. My successes, same like you. I have a very, very similar story. I'm a bit older. For me, I didn't even feel like I was an adult man until I was 42 years old. So you're now at the age, coming up on the age, where I felt like I was an adult man for the first time and I could actually do adult things because I had to have already been very, very successful. I had this expectation in my own mind of what I had to achieve before I could say to myself, okay, you're an adult. And for me, it was, being a Fortune 500 company CEO running a multi-billion-dollar organization. And then I could say, okay, and I've done it. And you realize after all of this that the reason why I had to go through all the betrayal and the difficulty, abandonment, etc., was because it's the opposite of unconditional love. And when we choose to learn unconditional love, we will experience throughout our lives circumstances of the exact opposite of that unconditional love, which is betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
You don't feel betrayed by people that you don't care about. You don't feel betrayed by people that you never had a close relationship with. You don't feel abandoned by someone that you just barely met, right? So I realized that I really came here for a much deeper, bigger reason, and I had to learn how to love myself without success. I had to learn how to love myself without girlfriends. I had to learn how to love myself without all the accoutrements that come along with being an optimist. And when I say this for a reason, I really truly believe, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, that optimism is one of the great things because it's so powerful. You probably have heard this story, right? Ronald Reagan used to tell this story about the two little boys on Christmas Day, where they're both twin little boys and they're like 5 years old, and the parents are concerned because one of them is a super optimist and the other is a super pessimist. And so they go to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist says, well, let me do a little test on them on Christmas Day. So he sets up two rooms, right? And one of them is out in the barn and the other one is inside the house. And he sets up a room for the little pessimistic boy. And it's got all these presents inside of it and everything. And so on Christmas morning, he takes the little boy that's the pessimist. He swings open the door and he says, all of this is for you. Every single toy any kid would ever want at that age. It's all perfect. The G.I. Joe with the eagle eye and the erector set and the Legos and the whole night, everything you could possibly want. And the kid burst into tears. And the guy says to him, the psychiatrist says, what's wrong? Why are you crying? He says, because I'm going to lose some of these toys because my friends are going to take some of them and my other friends are going to break them of my toys and I'm going to be really sad. So the guy's like, wow, this kid really is pessimistic. So he takes the other little boy outside to the barn, swings open the door, and all that's in there is manure. And the little optimistic boy jumps up and down. He says, oh, goody. And he says, why are you so happy? He says, well, with all this manure, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere. And that has been the story of my life. But in being able to find a positive angle on everything, it also has led me to being more conditional in love. It has led me to being more susceptible, I guess, to heartbreak. It has led me to pushing down when I do experience that heartbreak deep into myself and not letting it come out and ever see the light of day. And so I have a feeling that probably some of this might resonate for you because I see you as an optimist. Every competitor, everybody who's the hero, right, always has to find that silver lining. But do you think that there's a toll on always being the optimist?
I think there's well, what happens is that when optimism becomes an expectation, that's when you pay the price, right? Because when you have an expectation, then you're actually defeated one way or another. So the trick would be to find optimism without expectation, because an expectation means if you get what you expect, then you're not you're not actually excited. It's just what you expected. So it can actually limit the joy of your experience. If you don't get what you expect, well, you're disappointed. However, you have to expect yourself to succeed, and you have to believe that you're going to in order for you to actually achieve. So it's a challenging and kind of calibration that's required, where you have to be mindful of your expectations and also, remain optimistic, try to be optimistic, but without expectations. And that to me means you have to back up the perspective, and you have to say, like, I am universally optimistic, and I don't know exactly how it's going to play out, but I know that whatever happens, happens for me. And I know that whatever it is, I can be grateful for. I can make the choice for gratitude. And I think that's really the key to getting out of this kind of conundrum, because expectations are a problem, and if you expect something specifically, like what I try to have as my only expectation is it's all going to work out. It's all going to work out. It's all going to work out. I don't know how, but it's all going to work out. And if I can stay there, then I'm never disappointed, because it just means, okay, it works out through the path of challenge. Like this is the way that it's working out. We needed this challenge to overcome this challenge. I needed this betrayal to actually become stronger and find more self-love. I needed this accident to have more faith in the universe that even this happened for me in some way. Like everything, it starts to give you that kind of obstacle is the way Stoic mentality. And the general optimism is kind of backed up to the purview of something far more cosmic with a K and universal.
Really fascinating. So let me go ahead and just tear off the Band-Aid then. What do you think this world is? You're one of the most well-read people I've ever met on reading and studying philosophy. I got that not out of the podcasts, but I got it out of just knowing you and talking with you in those moments that were not being recorded. And I see you as a true seeker, someone who wants to understand truth. And so with all that you've read, with all that you've seen, all the hundreds of people that you've done podcast interviews with, that many of which are some of the great philosophers of our generation, what would you say is the purpose of life?
The purpose of life is the self-pleasuring of God, I would say, is what I really like the idea of right now. Is that this is, and this comes from
masturbation.
Exactly.
It sounds like.
Exactly. Like it's the self-pleasuring of God. And part of the pleasure of that God is experiencing is all of our pleasure. Every time we step into genuine pleasure, there's pleasure there. And then also, if we were going to create, Alan Watts does this great digression about if you could dream about anything, first you would dream about dancing girls and everything would be perfect. And then you would dream about some greater conflict. And then you would ultimately dream a world that's exactly like ours, because we would want the challenge. We would want the mystery. We would want this. So that's part of the pleasure of God pleasuring itself, this force of Eros, Shekinah, in this huge act of self-pleasuring, which includes the mystery, the unknown, the ability to forget and remember and fall in love and fall out of love, the heartbreak, the pain, the struggle, the challenges, worthy opponents to come up against. This is a gigantic act of self-pleasure. And I think when you frame it that way, and that service to the divine is creating more pleasure, but the whole thing is a whole game about how do we create the maximum pleasure for the maximum amount of beings, first and foremost, which has to be yourself. And to me, that feels the best when I think about, because you can say, oh, this is a place to learn, but why does God want to learn? Like really, what's the purpose behind that? Like we're driven. And I think you know, homo imago deus, like we're in the image of the divine. Like we make our choices ultimately with, at some level, some aim for pleasure, whether it's our own or somebody else's, but we're trying to build a better world so people can enjoy it more. And so we have to enjoy our life more to actually lead a life where people enjoy it more. So, and then I think extrapolating this all the way up and all the way down really kind of helps me understand the purpose. So every time I step into some joy, bliss, ecstatic state, love, union, struggle, challenge, inspiration, it's like this is all co-participated in through the divine, who's like, yes, 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 keep going and tell me more, feel it all.
It reminds me of another quote by Alan Watts, where he says, "Man only suffers because he takes seriously what the gods made for fun."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I definitely am of that same mindset, that although I might modify it just slightly and say, it's not that God needs to learn. I think God wants to experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think that God wants to, and that from that unique experience, it learns more about itself. It learns more about the nature of being. I fundamentally believe that the best kind of learning is not sitting in a classroom, and it's those realizations. So maybe it's experiential realizations is at this conscious mind level, because we created this separation for ourselves, I believe, where if we had access to our entire mind, the higher self, then we are God. But we put ourselves, when you're infinite, omnipotent, omnipresent, the only game that you could play that would be fun would be for you to limit and put limitations on your omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence.
For sure. For sure.
Otherwise, what's the point of the game?
It's
And
not fun.
it's not fun, right? And this is a Shakespeare line, the game's afoot. It is literally that we are here to experience and to expand ourselves through realizations of the divine. And so we can find even things that we've left to ourselves, because we notice that this tapestry of our lifetime can be interwoven even with our past lives. We find things that we might even have left as encryptions to ourselves, because we're starting to realize that the nature of time is not linear. It is not the way that we've believed it to be. Maybe the distant future is actually also the distant past. And everything is retrocausal. All of it intended for us to have these big realizations. Then we have things like psychedelics that help us to remember who we are, to lift the veil. Does that resonate for you?
Of course. And I think really, to clarify what I'm saying, which to make it so that it includes what you're saying, is that it's the desire for the divine to have all of these evolutionary experiences and to experience what it's like for the divine to be the God as Aubrey, or the God as Robert, or the God as everyone else. I mean, this is what Christ was actually teaching. And here I am, talking about the teachings of Christ when I was 15, I wanted to dismantle everything, right? So it's a full circle experience, but fundamentally it's a desire to move through these evolutionary challenges and experiences and experience. So pleasure perhaps is too much. The pleasure is in the desire, and the desire is to experience as much of life that can possibly experience. And, I think of the divine as looking at us and just being completely enraptured in our story, in everybody's story, and just like, tell me more, go for it, fucking live. Like, let's see what we can find, see what you can discover, see what in this particular loca, this particular world, in this particular way, how can you figure out this puzzle? How can you understand? How can you feel this emotion in your particular body, and this sensation in your particular body? It's like just completely enraptured in all of these experiences. And that's the way I see the cosmos, is just giving us access to this deep desire for maximum experience, like you said, and then all of the sensation that comes from that. Because I think sensation, I look at sensation like for us, there's pleasure and pain, there's agony, and then there's, ecstasy. But if you really look at it from a vibration point, those are just different notes on the
Yeah.
cosmic keyboard. They're just different notes. So it's like, and I think we look at things in terms of the polarity because we have a body, etc. But I think the divine really sees things in terms of like maximum complexity, experience, and notes. And yes, I think pleasure matters because the divine is participating as us in our pleasure. So it's not that pleasure doesn't matter, but there's multiple levels of realization about
But I
like,
think you're right. I think that God, I don't want to say he, but God, which I believe probably is, genderless. It's both.
yeah,
Um,
for sure.
and maybe that's why we're seeing so much reflections about that being such a big topic in society right now. I don't know. It's just one of those weird reflections that we keep seeing more and more of, that is actually just a manifestation at this level of existence, but actually is representative of something much more profound and deeper. And, we look at right now the world. I went to a lecture the other night, and I sat next to Donald Hoffman, who is a professor. If you haven't had him on your podcast, you definitely should.
Mm,
He's is a professor of psychology, but he's a neuroscientist as well, who is probably the world's expert on mathematical mapping of human consciousness. And I'm going to have him on my podcast here pretty soon, but he's an amazing fellow. But we sat and watched this guy give the presentation on fossil fuel. Now, it was interesting because the presentation on fossil fuel was really about to say that, actually all the electric cars and everything, I love Teslas and all that stuff, but there's an argument to be made that a complete departure from all fossil fuels on the planet is actually a worse carbon footprint than what, fossil fuels represents today. And I was kind of surprised to hear that, but I was provoked. It was an evocative discussion about, and he wrote a book called The Future is Fossil Fuels. And I was like, okay, it's an opposite sort of way of thinking. So I'm interested just in hearing the opposite perspective on it. But what he pointed out during the conversation, which was fascinating, was that people today have this new phenomenon, which is sort of like a collective self-loathing,
mm-hmm,
that humanity should be eradicated from the planet because we are bad,
mm-hmm,
and that the nature of man is inherently bad. And therefore, if we just removed mankind from the planet, then, the planet would be this serene, beautiful ecosystem that, might get hit by asteroids every once in a while, but would be a much better place than the way it is today with human beings who exploit the planet so much. And I remember thinking to myself, well, what is this actually a reflection of? Because everything that we experience in the outside world is just a reflection of what's going on inside of us. And I asked the question, I said, do you think that this might have something to do with the level of narcissism in the world? And by narcissism, I don't really mean true self-love. I mean self-loathing, because narcissism
mm-hmm,
is not self-love. It is loving only the reflection that you believe you're projecting,
mm-hmm.
not the one that everyone else can see per se. And I said, is this just a reflection collectively of society experiencing a very high degree of judgment and narcissism? And he looked at me like, I think he was like a super conservative guy. And he's like, what? And I looked at Donald Hoffman, and he looked at me and he's like, yeah, totally like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I really would like to hear your thoughts on that. Do you think that what we feel on the inside, maybe that we're not even aware of, is what ends up getting manifested in the world around us in this God's pleasure filled simulation of experience?
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that we've so in the Kabbalist lineage, there's this idea of the Sitra Akra, and
Yep.
that means the upside down. And so many things have been placed in the upside down. You can take two things and just to illustrate how upside down things are. Fear God, God fearing, right? Like this is the idea about God. When I came to the tail end of the Bible Belt out there in Texas, God fearing, good God fear. God is the last fucking thing you need to fear, right? Like God is the opposite. It's the antithesis of fear. Fear, it's the literal opposite. So it is the absolute inverse that you need to fear God, right? So you place something like that in society, it starts to invert the mind. It starts to actually turn the mind upside down. Then you have, songs and ways in which people say love hurts. No, it doesn't. Love has never hurt. Not one person, not ever. Love doesn't hurt. All things, lots of things associated with love, like betrayal, like the loss of love, which has a lot more to do with expectations and what codependencies and attachments you have to that love. But love has never hurt anything. So we have broken memes inside our mind, and then downstream, all of the kind of suppression of pathways to pleasure and the suppression of our feminine nature and suppression of all of this. And so everything is kind of upside down in the way that we look at the world. And we look at ourselves as it's man versus nature. What the fuck are you talking about? Man is nature. We're the neural network of Gaia who's learning how to experience itself in a new way through the development of our own consciousness. And what I think is ultimately our destiny is to be intelligent enough and develop enough technology that we can prevent that next fucking asteroid from coming and wiping out all of life. Like, we're here as protectors of Gaia. And I really have seen that in my own journey. So I think what we're experiencing is we've lost our way. Like, everything has become kind of upside down. We believe in what Charles Eisenstein would say, the myth of separation, this idea that it's me and it's you, or it's our family and it's someone else's family, or our nation or another nation, instead of this more holistic view of, no, we're one race in part of one planet. Like, it's all connected and part of one cosmos, which is part of one God. Like, and it's like, so team Earth, team human, team, cosmos, team universe, team God. Like, that's the team. And it fractals all. And of course, yes, team family, and then team yourself as like the first individual unit. But that's all. It's like so many broken understandings. And I think the downstream effects that we're seeing are a lot of these broken understandings, things that have been wrapped in shame, our own impulses to pleasure and our sexuality, and the suppression from, we were founded by Puritans, for goodness sake, and still we haven't shed that yoke. So we feel guilty about feeling pleasure. And if it's not the Puritans involving sex, it's a puritanical industrial revolution work ethic, where actually the pursuit of pleasure is seen like you're not a proper manly contributing member of society. You're just fucking off. And so this whole idea of like what we're here for is backwards. And yeah, I think there's a lot of self-loathing. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of, isolation, solipsistic. This is me, and all that matters is what's here, which is very sociopathic. I think this is the myth of separation at scale, is like some mild form of sociopathy played out, time and again. And I think, it's just worried about the next short-term win for yourself, whether it's a political campaign that you're trying to win, or you're trying to win the next quarterly earnings report. And so fuck it. It doesn't matter. Like, let's push this fucking drug treatment, or let's lie about this thing, and let's do these, like, whatever matters. Everybody is just kind of, we've lost this universal sense of we're all on the same team here. And I think that's what we really need to find. And I think we're going deeper and deeper into our own shame, into our own self-loathing, into our own, as a way to kind of blow ourselves up so that we have that rock bottom moment like you and I talked about. And I think sadly, we need a collective rock bottom moment. Potentially, I pray that we don't, but we may need a collective rock bottom moment to be like, fuck, like this whole backwards way of doing things can no longer work. We have to basically put in a new operating system. And I pray that that's gradual, but I worry that it may need something more extreme like what we experienced.
So what are your thoughts? If you could kind of look in the in a crystal ball, right, to kind of tell our viewers here your thoughts on where the future is going to go, how would you describe, the world, and how different would it be from this world, say 10 years from now?
Mhm. I think that within 5 years, I think psychedelic medicine is going to be sweeping the world. And people are going to be going to treat their anxiety. They're going to be going to treat their depression. They're going to be going to, for
You saw that
some.
New York and California just proposed legislation to, decriminalize psilocybin.
Mhm. Yep. And that's going to continue. And I think that will be helpful. But I think really what's going to make the biggest difference is I think most of the people who want to do psilocybin just to do psilocybin are already doing it anyways.
True that.
It's like, it's nice. It's like, you don't have to worry about it as much, but, until it's like, I really think the biggest aspect of this, and I actually really applaud that it's coming through the medical channel, because what I expect to happen is so many people, mental disorders are continuing to just spiral out of control. And I think when people go to treat those mental disorders with psilocybin or MDMA or whatever other next wave of psychedelics, they're going to go in to treat a condition that's very small, and they're going to find something that's very big. They're entheogens. They're going to awaken the divine within them. And that's going to actually put a new operating system. So it's almost like the side effect of psilocybin is treating anxiety. The effect is it gives you access to another world, the world that you talked about that overlays over like the true world. And I think that's going to start to happen at this kind of exponentialized rate, where people are going to have friends, who are going to be like, look, I was fucking real depressed. I was anxious too. And then I did this treatment, and it's in this treatment model. So I think it's going to break down a lot of the barriers. And I see that really driving a new consciousness. And then with that new consciousness, I think our expectations for what leadership is going to look like, and what leadership will accept. Now, of course, there's some ways in which the old guard is defending itself. It's defending itself through mainstream media. It's all woven in. Empire, as you could call it, has captured media and politics as we know it. But there's a lot of decentralization of media. I think Joe Rogan's podcast, for example, has more views than all major,
CNN, right? All the major networks.
Exactly. So that is participating in this proliferation of knowledge. And then it's going to be, so knowledge is going to be out there, and then also people's access to it. And then if you start to get big celebrities on board, I think there's a lot of people who are in the closet still about what they actually believe, because they're playing the game of empire. But once they start to shift, it was a big deal that Aaron Rodgers came on my podcast and talked about doing ayahuasca, and, talked about doing, he did ayahuasca, then won 2 MVPs in the NFL, right? So that dispels a lot of the different biases about what that is. And if more and more people start to come out and actually share the truth about their experiences, and then actually have the courage to share their opinions about what is going on in the fuckery that's in the world, hopefully, we'll start to turn the upside down, right side up. And that's the cause that I'm here for. And that's the cause that I believe in. That's my essential optimism, is that we got a shot. It's not going to be easy, but we got a shot.
So last question for you. Of all the almost 400 podcasts you've done, if you could kind of summarize a message to give to everybody in the world, like if you could truncate all of that down, that wisdom, right, compress it into a few sentences, what would it be?
I think the thing is awareness is always the key. Like awareness, if you focus on awareness, then I think Anthony DeMello does a great job. He wrote a book called Awareness. If somebody wants to dive deep in this, but with awareness, everything follows. if you become aware of the multidimensional nature of yourself, if you become aware that, we're capable of unconditional love and what the difference is between them, if you become aware of what you're projecting and what you're actually listening, when you're, how to interact with people, what's possible, the more awareness you have, the more, the more that you have an advantage in the world. And I think if anything, that's one thing that I can say is that reliably, no matter what's happened, up or down, this way or that way, my awareness, my chart of my awareness has gone from the low left to the top right. Like it's trending upwards and always trending upwards. I'm becoming more and more aware of myself, more and more aware of the world, more and more aware of the cosmos. And that's, I think, the path. And each trial, each lesson, each book, each conversation, if you're paying attention, will just expand that awareness just a little bit more.
Maybe that's a good way to describe the nature of this world, that God's pleasure comes from expanded awareness.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. No doubt. No doubt. It's definitely a part of it. It's like, what's going to happen in this world? Like, why do we like watching movies about a different world? Why do we like watching Avatar? Like, I don't know, it's fucking interesting. Look at this world. Look at these animals that developed. Look at the way this thing worked out. Fucking incredible. Like, I really see the divine, like, going like, whoa, Earth, fucking amazing. Like, look at this crazy story. Holy shit, that was gnarly.
Get your popcorn.
Like, wow, that was beautiful. God, why did they do that? I can't believe they did that. Like, oh, I thought he was the hero. He's really the villain. Oh, fucking surprise. Like, it's the story of it. It's like, it's a grand fucking story.
I saw the funniest meme during, the first part of the pandemic. It was like all these like extraterrestrial dudes sitting around. One of them's got like popcorn in his lap and they're about to turn on the TV. They're like, have you seen the latest episode of Earth, man? Shit's getting crazy down there.
Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly how I feel about it too. But Aubrey, I want to thank you for being a great friend, for doing what you're doing and being so sincere and vulnerable in your search for greater wisdom and expansion of awareness. And you really are someone who lives this. And I encourage everybody to, if you don't already follow Aubrey, where can they best find you, Aubrey? I know you're on Instagram. I know you're everywhere. We're going to put everything on the bottom part of this on the YouTube page and all the podcast pages this is going to go on to. But where's the best place to get you?
Instagram is great because that's a place where I'm continually kind of pointing to things. I have a newsletter where I write my latest thoughts on, if you go to aubreymarcus.com, and then, the podcast and my YouTube, it's YouTube/Aubrey Marcus Pod. Somehow I fucked up and lost Aubrey Marcus handle, and it's mine, but we can't log into it. So it exists somewhere in the cosmos. But yeah, if you find me, you can find me any of those places. And if, we have different fit for service events. So if you want to come hang with me personally, or Arcadia is our music festival that you were at, and you're going to be at Fit for Service this year. So people can check that out if they want to.
Are you doing Arcadia again this year?
Yeah, we're looking at it. I'm having a meeting tomorrow where we're going to make that decision. So
are you going to have it in Montana?
It's going to be yes.
Is it going to be?
We'll see. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, well, I don't know. We're having, it's interesting. It's interesting that it's not been as easy as I would have thought to put on a festival. I didn't think it was going to be that easy, but it's a little harder than I expected.
I couldn't believe how quickly you guys pulled it together and put it in Vegas and how great it turned out. I mean, Area 15, that place was really cool. And I ended up meeting this guy in New York when I went to speak at the United Nations, who was there one night as well. And he's like the founder of the Blue Man Group. And he's one of the partners of Area 15. So he totally knew about, pulling you guys together and getting that venue done. But I mean, that one room we were in was crazy cool. It was it was like being an avatar. That was
no doubt. No doubt. Yeah, it was a special event.
By the way, did you see Avatar?
I did.
I thought the spiritual undertones in that thing were just like, they were off the charts in the last one as well. But in this one, it was like super off the charts with drilling the whale's brain for Amrita, right? The cerebrospinal fluid for immortality. I was like, wow, this is like this. You know that the world must be going mainstream in its spirituality when this is kind of the topic that's being discussed, and it becomes a part of the public consciousness.
There were some incredibly beautiful aspects of that, and then some to me that were disappointing. I thought it was like it was very bellicose, like very much like war is the solution, and had the most beautiful spiritual undertones and like illumination of interdynamic relationships in the family. It was very interesting to watch it. I definitely recommend watching it, but to me it was a mix of the fantastic and also like, God, this is disappointing.
I saw it in that new X theater where they like the side walls are even like movie screened. So
oh wow.
It's like you're in it. It's like the room we're in, right? Except there's no back wall. It's like
Wow.
the room we were in for Arcadia. It was pretty cool, but you're right about that. I thought that some of the undertones also included stuff that was like very not believable. Like what happened to all the rest of the villagers for the last hour, right? When they're like battling it out. It's like they all just went home and like had a coffee or something. Like what the?
Yeah, totally. There were some holes. Really there were some holes. Yeah.
That's right. So, but anyway, Aubrey, great to see you again. Look forward to seeing you again. And I'll also be attending your conference for Fit for Service, and excited to do that in the fall, and hopefully see you again, maybe in Miami at some point.
I'd love that. Always great to talk with you, brother. So much fun.
Seeing you, man. All the best.
Yeah.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.